Krish, we've only known the final results in Scotland for a few hours, but already there's a fierce spinning operation underway to try and define what those results mean. Opponents of independence casting doubt on Nicola Sturgeon's mandate for a referendum, and she has hit back with some numbers of her own. But as far as the Scottish Parliament is concerned, with the SNP and the Greens gaining ground, there has never been a greater majority here in Holyrood in favour of independence. And that set off something of a phony war between Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson. She has said, well, stop us in court. And the UK government today sort of saying, well, that won't happen. So they're sizing each other up. And in the past few hours, Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson have spoken on the phone, we're told, about the pandemic recovery, agreeing to work together ahead of the UN climate conference in Glasgow in November, but no doubt disagreeing about this, because the Scottish Government readout of that phone call tells us the First Minister made clear to Boris Johnson the question of a referendum is a matter of when, not if.
Well done.
After sweeping her opponents aside, Nicola Sturgeon says her priority is the pandemic. But the mind games over an independence referendum are intensifying.
Welcome, Mr. Gove.
Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove said this morning the UK government wouldn't challenge a referendum in the but he questioned the SNP's mandate for requesting one. Talk of Tories softening on a referendum, surely premature.
What we cannot afford is anyone taking their eye off the ball when it comes to recovery, when it comes to investment in the NHS, by having a conversation about, a protracted conversation about the Constitution. That's the first point. The second point to bear in mind is that a majority of people who voted in the constituencies voted for parties that were opposed to a referendum.
Nicola Sturgeon back to work with clear instructions, she believes, from the electorate for the right to vote on independence again. Have you got a mandate? Michael Gove suggesting you haven't got one.
Yes, I do, but my first priority is to get back into Butte House here and continue to steer the country through the COVID crisis.
It's another remarkable victory. 85% of constituencies went SNP, which did make picking up seats on the regional list under proportional representation all the harder. And while Scotland is pretty evenly split on independence, elections are about seats, and the old parties of the Union are very much outnumbered here now. The SNP got its second highest ever seat total, while the Greens, also committed to a referendum, have never had more MSPs. Neither have the Tories, while Labour and the Lib Dems have never had fewer. Overall, it's the biggest ever majority of pro-independence parties at Holyrood, dwarfing the number of unionist seats, 72 to 57. The Tories chuffed there is no SNP majority. They argue that's what it took Alex Salmond to get a referendum in 2011. But in this Parliament, theirs is a minority view.
We won that election overwhelmingly.
And so the battle for public opinion is already well underway. Nicola Sturgeon will attend Boris Johnson's pandemic summit, the Tories talking up what they're calling Team UK, even as Team Scotland prepares to put in a transfer request.
Ciaran Jenkins, well, earlier I spoke to the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross, and I began by asking him if he was a bit disappointed that his colleagues in London have said that they won't be taking the Scottish Government to court to stop a second referendum.
Well, no, because what the Scottish Parliament can and cannot do is clearly defined in the Scotland Act. And what Nicola Sturgeon is suggesting is going ahead with something that's out with the powers of the Scottish Parliament. In 2014, when the SNP got a referendum, they called it the gold standard of referendums because it had a Section 30 order from the UK government.
I mean, they won 64 seats. If they'd have won 65 seats and had an outright majority all by themselves, would they have had a mandate for an independence referendum?
Well, that's clearly how they achieved an independence referendum in 2014, was winning a majority in the 2011 election.
So if they'd have won one more seat, you'd have backed a referendum. Is that what you're saying?
We said we said during this election that the way to stop an SNP majority and a way to stop a second independence referendum was voting Scottish Conservatives. And that's why I believe we've had our best ever result here in Scotland, holding 31 seats.
But just back to this point, I mean, are you really saying that if the SNP had won one more seat, then you'd be fine with the referendum going ahead? That's the difference.
I never won
no,
another.
But you'd accept that you didn't have a right to stop it.
No, what I'm saying is there was an opportunity, as there have been in the last two elections, for the SNP to be returned with a majority. The public across Scotland have decided to stop that.
But would that have been a mandate?
I was just saying they've decided to stop that, and they did so by supporting the Scottish Conservatives in record numbers.
But would, in your terms, an SNP majority on its own have been a mandate for a second referendum?
Well, I explained a couple of answers ago. That's how they achieved a referendum in 2014.
So the answer is yes,
that's
it
how
would.
they did it.
I mean, that's history. I'm talking about the future. Would it have been, for the future, a mandate for a second referendum?
I'm saying that's exactly how they went about holding a referendum in 2014.
I want you to talk about the future.
Well, we know what happened in the past.
Yes.
You're asking me to predict another election.
So what I'm pointing out is the absurdity of your position, which is that if they'd have just won one more seat in this very complex system, they'd have had a mandate for an independence referendum in your terms, but because they didn't, they don't.
Well, they had a mandate in 2011 because they got a majority, and that's how they held the 2014 referendum. But at the two successive attempts for Nicola Sturgeon to gain a majority, she has failed. And I think a lot of what we're hearing from Nicola Sturgeon and her supporters within the SNP about court battles and the UK government taking the Scottish government to court is all just a bit of deflection from the fact that she has failed now on two occasions to secure a majority that the SNP were previously able to achieve here in Scotland.
Some people think you're doing exactly what the SNP want now, which is saying no when the parliamentary democratic conclusion of this election is clearly an even more pro-independence parliament than there was before the election, and that all you'll do is stoke pro-independence feeling. Are you sure you've got the right strategy for the union?
Well, I would question Nicola Sturgeon's strategy, telling people on Tuesday that they could vote SNP and it wouldn't be taken as a mandate for another independence referendum, and then by Friday going on all the television stations to say she now has a mandate for a second independence referendum. I think many people in Scotland will be bitterly disappointed that their vote is now being used in this way by Nicola Sturgeon when she gave an assurance it wouldn't be.
Ruth Davidson, your predecessor, has done a very interesting thread on Twitter talking about you, saying, you know, you weren't interested in being personally popular. You were very focused on just doing the right thing. I mean, do you feel that that's a fair characterisation? Have you taken a lot of personal flack during the course of this campaign? Would you like to be liked more now?
Sometimes in politics, you know, the most important thing is results. And the fact is the other pro-UK parties who also took some shots at me have gone backwards. They've lost seats. The Scottish Conservatives have maintained our position as the main opposition in Scotland. We've held our seats at 31 and we've increased our vote share. So whatever people have said about me during the campaign or will continue to say, I'll take that as a success for the Scottish Conservatives and the people who have been supporting our party both in the campaigning and with their votes over the last few weeks.
Douglas Ross, thank you very much.
Thank you.